teaching ecological restoration.
Yep, and Jane, it would have been great to have Jane here with us because she brings a wealth of expertise and richness to the conversation, but she has a family emergency that she's working with right now. So we're going to do our best to fill in for Jane. And I am particularly excited about this session because while I started out my career as a wildlife biologist, I'm moving into the social scientist phase of that. And I think for water, as most of you, I'm sure all of you know, sometimes environmental scientists, and I can say that because I've been one, we really focus on the environmental data and how to solve the problem environmentally and technically in that fashion. And the human side is this black box, it's like, well, we know that people, the key thing for us is to help people make different choices and understand why making those different choices is a benefit to them as well as a benefit to society and benefit to the lakes. That's a critical challenge that we face in water resource management. We've done a good job on point source pollution. There's still vigilance and more to be done there, but non-point source, many people taking different action is really where it's at for us right now. So that's the spirit of where we're coming from with this presentation and this conversation with you tonight. So we're going to talk about two things primarily. We're going to share a little bit of information with you from a communication plan, communication strategy that Marion and Jane have worked on in conjunction with Office of Lakes and Watershed, and Marcia. Hartwig is in the back, and Sue Jones, of course, you all know is upstairs. And then also some survey data that we collected related to what kind of education and outreach is currently going on in the watershed, and to inform us a little bit more about what we got, so we know, where we might be going to build capacity in that area in the future. I see nod from the expert here, so that was okay. So Marion is going to talk first about the communication strategy piece, and then I will follow up with a little teaser on the education outreach survey that we did, and then we'd like to have a conversation with you about how we can move forward, building our own capacity in the watershed to do a better job in the area. Okay, so Marion?
Okay. PowerPoint. All right, so when Jane and I started working on this project, we were hired to put together a communications strategy for the Office of Lake and Watershed and for the Yahara Clean project. And our background is that we worked doing values-based communications for the biodiversity project. We started that in 1996. And Jane has an expertise in water, I would say watershed issues and any other types of regional communication strategies. We've worked for Sierra, she's done work for Sierra Club, we've worked on projects for the Mississippi River, we've worked on projects for the Great Lakes, and so that's the background that was informing us when we put together this communications strategy. And so this is not, we don't have public opinion data for this community, but this information is informed by years of putting together communication plans for other organizations. So some of the things we thought about for this particular watershed is that we need to build a common vision, and a common vision is really important, especially for long term. We need to build community momentum for restoration. Again, as Rebecca mentioned, how do we actually work on the ground making these changes? We need to develop informed constituencies and sustain their commitment. One of the things that we do in bias-based communications is to identify who the different constituents are and what their values are, and then how to appeal to them to help sustain their commitment over time. Develop and deepen a sense of public ownership of the watershed and its future. So that means develop a community identity with the lakes, the landscape, and our sense of place. Thinking about watersheds is a really good way of identifying a sense of place. Actually, Anne's Forbes here has been really instrumental in helping think about our community in terms of a watershed. Participate in solutions, create a shared sense of what a clean and healthy means. Clean and healthy in our lakes doesn't necessarily mean that they're clear. So Marcia's mentioned about that, of like in our watershed, you know, we have in our lakes, we have the muddy bottoms and we have the plant growth that is really important. It's not a bathtub and it's not a swimming pool. So, and a lot of people think, oh, a healthy lake, that's what it is. And so it's changing that concept. Understand the steps along the way to recovery, and understands that our lakes and our watershed, this is going to take time. There's multiple steps, and it's going to take long term. It's going to take several generations. And that at the same time affirming hope, efficiency, and that the effort is worth it. That cumulative efforts are going to have cumulative impacts. And finally, we want to build a watershed literacy over time for better decision making. Public opinion research shows that most people don't know they live in a watershed. They don't know what the term means. And even ecological literacy has been declining in the United States over time. So it's kind of like helping understand that this is a complex living system. And then instill behaviors that reduce pollution and protect the watershed. All right, so this is Jane's PowerPoint. I have to make a disclaimer here. This is Jane's PowerPoint. So she probably had other information along the lines, but these are what our thoughts were. So values that can anchor our communities. Again, this is based in public opinion research about the environment in general, but also Mississippi River, Great Lakes. Community and quality of life, sense of place and community identity, family and future generations. Family and future generations is actually really high as a value for why we should protect the environment or protect water. Civic pride. We're proud of our lakes. We're not going like this. You know, we like to point them out. They're part of our community. Responsibility to help take care of the lakes. Accountability. Who's responsible for what and who's accountable. Leadership that we can all pull together, and pragmatism and effectiveness. Pragmatism, especially in the Midwest, is really important. Now, I'm curious though, what are some other values that you think in this community that are important in this community? What are we missing here? Yeah.
Are there any values that are economic driven?
Yeah.
So, thinking about the economic impact that the lakes have to our community as a whole.
So for certain audiences and constituencies, that is going to be really important, yes. And so any communication strategy that we come up with, we should talk about the value of the importance of having a healthy lakes is also will help have a healthy economy. Great. Yes?
Yep. Clean groundwater is the last great untouched resource. We cut all the trees, we took all the fish, but that clean water underground is still there. But if we pollute it, you know, then it's like a huge tax on future generations. It costs $8 million to drill a new well.
So there's the cost piece, but I'm also hearing a health concern. So with that, okay. All right. Any other values that people feel are really important that would appeal to this community in particular for watershed protection?
Stewardship.
Stewardship. Yes, we have a very engaged community in terms of, this is the founding area of the Leopold and land ethic, and how can we live that land ethic, make it a lake ethic, watershed ethic. Okay, any others? We probably hit most of the important ones there, so thanks. And then our communication strategy, we did touch upon those as well. And then the concerns we need to address, health and safety, water quality, that just came up in terms of groundwater, community reputation and image. Looking at Madison as this is a really a lovely place to come and learn and recreate, And if we don't, we have lost tourism and attractiveness to leaders and talent, both for the university and also for businesses. We need to address the concerns about lost aesthetics and beauty. We need to address the concerns about lost experience, lost way of life and traditions. This is really important, again, people passing down generational knowledge and their connection to the sense of place and their experiences. Long-term water supply needs, again, groundwater as well. Wildlife conflicts, that's around geese and invasive species. Public access to lakes. Property values, how property values will change if our lakes get more polluted. And habitat, both in terms of restoration and preservation. Any other concerns to add to that list? Yes.
Well, looking to the future, the cities can get bigger, and transportation is going to be a lot more expensive. You know, the price of gas is going to go up. So if we can develop local little green spaces where people can recreate within the city and get to know nature, then we can avoid those costs of everybody having to jump in their car and drive out of town.
So I'm hearing a couple of things when you say that preservation, another concern is the fragmentation, so preservation of green space in the city, but also then the accessibility issue
So it's
as
really
well.
local nature is a coping strategy for these changes that we expect in the future.
Okay. So there's that, also the resiliency that we need to have. But again, not all citizens understand the concept of resiliency. So we'll have to find language that actually makes sense to people. There's a great resource called Water Words That Work, say that fast. Water Words That Work, that talk about that.
First of all, I'm very hard of hearing, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me. In some of the concerns that you need to address, one of the things that we have to make sure is we don't shoot ourselves in the foot all the time. And that's sometimes what we do. When, for instance, today's paper, when one of our own agencies is using 2,4-D in parts of our lake, there's not one thing responsible about using 2,4-D anywhere, no less in a body of water where things can dissipate for a long period of time. So we're talking about health and safety. We have to make sure that the people in charge aren't the ones that are creating the problems.
And there's also I hear health and safety, and also the understanding of impacts of our behaviors, understanding the short-term and long-term impacts of behavior.
That's something that I'm with an organization that's been raising money for 26 years for the Madison Lakes and all the other parts of this thing. And one of the things that we've had is problems with chemicals in our lake, whether they're chemicals that are put in our lake or runoff from different communities that are carrying chemicals to our lake. So it's something that we really have to be aware of.
Yeah, and also look at behavior change strategies around that.
I was concerned about the public policies on phosphorus
Okay.
and how that's going to impact.
Can you say more about that if you were going to talk to somebody off the street who knows nothing about phosphorus?
Well, I just think I mean, I think we spent all year talking about that in the Out Committee, and all of a sudden it just sounded like it was just wiped off the map. So I think that, people just have to be made aware of, how serious that is.
Okay, so keep phosphorus
Out of the lakes.
Yes, and I think that was one of the priority issues for the commission to talk about this year too. Sir?
Yeah, we have a lot of state, county, and city ordinances and regulations that control erosion and stormwater and things that harm our lakes. What we lack is enforcement of those regulations. Either there's no will or there's no an adequate staff to get the job done. So consequently, through public participation and government, we've passed lots of good regulations and ordinances, but they're not being followed. they're not being followed by a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses, a lot of governments. And so there we have detention ponds that are full of sediment. We have lots of things that are happening out there that are against the law, but nobody will enforce the law. So that's one of the major concerns that we need to address.
So that's going back to the accountability, making sure that our behaviors are held accountable.
I second the motion.
And so I'm going to add monitoring then. So
Another one is that we have a body called CARPC, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, that's supposed to control sprawl. I mean, as long as we keep sprawling out into the county, we're going to get more and more impervious surface. There's going to be less infiltration. There's going to be more stormwater runoff into the lakes. There's going to be lots more problems. So somehow we have to convince developers and the government, the Regional Planning Commission, to stop this sprawl and to start building up instead of out. And so these are a couple of concerns that are normally not listed.
And actually in some of the other research we've done in other areas that are actually more urban, sprawl is actually top of the list of concern. But again, we don't have public opinion data for this region. Ann, do you know any public opinion data, Michael?
For this area?
Yeah, for this
There was
area.
some collected with the, for stormwater,
Yeah.
Dane County stormwater, right? I don't know if MSD or something.
Okay. So that helps to identify, so duly noted. You and then you.
You know, I'm not quite sure how to articulate this because it's almost the antithesis of what we're looking at, but I just got something in the mail yesterday from one of the candidates running for county executive who is talking about taking away your property rights by not letting you use your property however you want to. In other words, you might be forced to have a rain garden. You might be forced. So, and talking about decreased property values by government regulations, which are intended to improve the quality of the lakes. So, so one of the concerns is the education and the communication about responsibility for managing your property in a way that doesn't harm lakes. That actually, how do you turn that around and make it be that you're adding value to your property and adding value because by improving the lakes, you know what I mean, by so that by helping have cleaner lakes, your property values increase, and that value associated with being able to do whatever you want on your property. It's that kind of private property rights. Is there a value associated with that? And I don't really know where that fits in here, but I was intrigued that that's still an issue. That's still a very prominent issue in some areas.
Yes, and it depends on the audience too, but property owners and homeowners, there may be a completely different communication strategy that is really talking about having to address things like property values and at the same time your autonomy as a homeowner, and yet there is a responsibility to the greater good. And so how do we frame those kinds of messages? Sir?
I think that number one, health and safety and the water quality. I don't know if any of you people have drive out Verona Road, but all that western end of the city got developed. And now we have collection ponds out there. Have you ever seen any wildfowl in there? They went to all this trouble to plant all these bulbs and even wired them in so that the ducks and geese wouldn't pull them out. Nothing grew. Nothing grows in that. I took a sample of that, took it to the state health department, and they said, my God, where did you get this?
Off of Verona Road, you said?
It's on Verona Road, and there's a big sign there talking about water quality. One of the biggest problems in the lakes in the city of Madison is our storm sewer water.
Yeah, okay.
Way back in the 50s, I cannot remember the guy's name, but one of the professors in limnology at the university said we got to plug them all up and back the water up to Badfish Creek and we'll let it run away. When you
Interesting.
go out Highway 151 to Verona, take a look on the right-hand side. There's a big sign there talking about this water. Look at it. It's beautiful. It won't, nothing can live in it.
That's really interesting. That would be actually a
Water
good photo
quality is
op.
the top. Well, the water quality is exactly what
Yeah.
is our number one.
Right. Okay, and that's going to appeal, water quality, I mean, some people say that water is going to be the new oil, the new gold. And that's why it's really important for us to take responsibility and all work together for preserving the watershed here because, yeah, we got some changes coming.
Marion, just one, very quickly, with what Robin was saying earlier, one of the things I heard her saying was about a value, and that value is community.
Yeah.
That we're concerned about individual rights, but there's this community right, and that could be a value.
And sometimes you get into that, you know, individual rights versus public rights or the common good rights, and then it is a question then sometimes of education as well. So when Jane and I were working on this, and we thought about that we need to communicate the solutions on 3 levels. This is part of a theory called frameworks, but one is local practices and projects. These are the things you can do. Here's what you can do. You've already mentioned some of them. Stormwater management, farming practices, beach protection, erosion control was mentioned. Another solution is system-wide thinking and systems-level thinking around agriculture, transportation, water management, zoning, planning. These are not piecemeal solutions, but how do these all relate and interrelate to one another? And the third level we talked about was the social and cultural frameworks, a watershed ethic. Now, my bias is I work at the Arboretum, we practice the land ethic, and Jane and I had a lot of interesting conversations about what would a watershed ethic look like. And that might appeal in this particular community because a lot of folks do think along those lines. So, let's see. So here are some of the message concepts that we cooked up. One is, our lakes help define our way of life in the capital region. These once sparkling lakes and the lakes that feed them have been degraded by decades of pollution. It's taken a long time for them to get to this stage. Too often our lakes are laden with algae or cloudy with sediment, and too often our beaches are contaminated with bacteria. It doesn't have to be this way. This is defining the problem. Our waters can be healthy and our wonderful lakes can be clean again. This is the vision. Reducing the loads of nutrients and sediments that wash into our lakes from farmlands, city streets, and even our lawns is the key to cleaner water. Taking big steps now will result in big improvements in the next few years. But sustaining our quality of life is a long-term commitment. Now here's a couple of concepts in here. Here's the multiple pathways, multiple solutions. It's going to be on a lot of different levels. So homeowners, city streets, farmland, multiple audiences, and multiple solutions. Everyone in our watershed shares the responsibility to care for our lakes and water. Working together, we give cleaner, healthier, and more beautiful Yahara Lakes back to our families, that's the families and future generations side, and our communities, and future generations of southern Wisconsin to enjoy and cherish. So this is sort of the overarching message concepts we created for the Yahara Lakes. So, any questions about that? Yes?
I noticed our lakes are much better than what they were 10 years ago. They're much better than they were 30 years ago. All the pollution isn't in them like they used to be. Even though we see them as being polluted, we never had things of taking water samples at the beaches and closing the beaches. That was unheard of, closing the beach. Yet they had body feces floating around in the water. It's, you know, unthinkable. But now the water is much better, and I've seen it even in the past 10 years as a fisherman. I've seen the water changes. But so far, with everything that has been on this whole thing, it's only got one thing that it all leads down to is money. Every one of those projects you had can't do nothing without the money. Not one thing. If you go back a couple pages and you look at everything there, it all takes money. Common sense goes a long ways, but it takes money to do that common sense. Because people don't want to do anything for free.
So are you saying when it takes money, do you mean it takes money for incentives for people to change behavior, or do you mean it takes money for us to create new programs, or do you mean that?
Takes money for everything and to make a circle.
Wow, that's interesting putting those two together. Okay, Ann?
I've seen this first one trip people up a number of times, and I guess my suggestion would be, because we no longer put raw sewage in the lakes, and we cleaned that up, that if you don't acknowledge that in the process of saying that, then you're going to have that come up every time. So you can say, although we cleaned up, we no longer put raw sewage in our lakes, or whatever, how do you say that?
Or arsenic.
And yeah, or arsenic. We still have some of the same old challenges and some new ones as well.
Good point.
Because that will discredit that one.
Right.
Somebody, for anybody who remembers the raw sewage, or remembers seeing
very
pictures
good
of
point.
it.
Thank you. Thanks to
There's a railroad car still out on Lake Monona that's filled with copper sulfate leaking.
Wow, I did not know that.
Still.
Underwater?
Underwater.
Without killing fungus.
There's also about 100 barrels along John Nolan Drive, 100 barrels of chemicals that are still down there.
Yeah.
Well, okay. All right.
I'm wondering if an overarching strategy, if this is about framing the solution or framing the problem. And I get concerned when we spend too much time talking about the problems, because you know, we put energy into things we love. We protect things we love. Things that are not going well overwhelm us, and we deny, we walk away, we step away from. So if we're going to move towards more abundance and less scarcity, I would like to see the communication strategy focus on positive, forward-thinking messages and less on continuing to frame the problem that everyone already knows.
Yes, and I agree, and there's multiple solutions as well, and there's going to be multiple solutions over time, and it's also really important how to communicate when those solutions have a success, and how do we start aggregating that information. There was another hand?
Yeah. Get back to me, I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, well, we'll have a little time for a little bit more dialogue, but thank you for that feedback, that's really helpful. All right, so I'm going to turn this part over to you, Rebecca.
And I am going to pass out 2 copies of this survey report. I realize that you will not, here we go, sorry, I need the X right here. I realize you won't be able to digest this all this evening, but this meeting is just a teaser to see, you know, what else we might get excited about and do together. So some of the education needs that were identified through Jane's and Marion's work, along with Marcia and Sue, were people need to know about watershed basics. What is a watershed? How the lakes are connected, and that lakes are living systems. We know this. Problems and solutions. Some people aren't even aware that there's a problem, so they may need to know a little bit about what the problem is. And I think Michael's point is a good one about, okay, what can we get excited about, and what's the positive vision that we're shooting for, and what kinds of solutions or what kinds of activities can get us to that positive vision. Next, stakeholder-specific knowledge and skills. So this gets to, how many of you have heard of community-based social marketing or social marketing generally? Yep. So, mean, one of the points is that there are very specific behaviors that you want to be very clear on what you want people to do and what they need to know to be able to achieve that behavior. And there may be barriers to stepping into that behavior, the things that might be in the way, like, we have this really great recycling program at this point in the city of Madison, and it makes it easy for us to recycle, so that it eliminates, not everybody has to take a trip to the recycling center to actually recycle. So there's a barrier that's been eliminated, and then also communicate what the benefits to people would be by doing those particular behaviors. Next, decision maker awareness and knowledge. So we're not only talking about the specific individuals that need to clean their boat or to spread manure in a different way, or be careful about the bait that they're using for fishing, or whatever it is that we want them to do, but how can we inform our elected officials? How can we inform our municipal staff, state staff, the people that have a different level of decision-making ability? So they're one of the education needs that were identified. And lake-friendly behavior change, I probably already covered that in what I said. Okay, some of the survey findings. So first, the survey itself was, and Marion will help me out here, but it was to many different groups, I forget what the total list of groups. Okay, 112 total groups, 45 groups responded. These are organizations in the Yahara watershed and in Dane County that are doing some kind of education or outreach activity. That was the list of that we sampled to determine what they were doing and how they were doing it regarding education and outreach. There was good distribution of these groups across the watershed, so we didn't just have them in Madison, or we didn't just have them, in Wanakee,
or Monona.
Or Monona, right. Many groups were engaged in some kind of education or outreach activity or communication activity, but there wasn't a lot of coordination going on among groups, which is one of the reasons we're having this meeting. There was limited targeting for specific audiences or stakeholders.
Most people said that who they mainly appealed to was the general public or their members. So,
right. And one of the things with behavior change is that you have to know who you need to change something and what they need to change, and be very specific about that to actually get change to occur. So that targeting would be a helpful next step, I think, as we're moving forward with our activities. Fairly heavy reliance on conventional, newsletters, brochures, websites.
And some research shows that newsletters actually really does help motivate people to take political action. Most people, though, are receiving their information now through the web or searching for information through the web. So.
And for those of you that are voters, you know that sometimes a site-specific message is the best way to get a change. That there's a sign right at the boat launch that tells you to clean your, clean the weeds off your boat or whatever. So we're looking for an effective media mix, and how can we use that mix sometimes it does take a financial incentive to get a change to occur. So that can be a part of an outreach activity as well. And then there's limited investment in evaluation of outcomes and impacts. So, okay, we just, had this great volunteer effort. We just spent this money. What did we get for it, and why? I think the why is really important. Like, okay, what we did, what we got or what we didn't get, but how can we utilize evaluation information to do it better next time? So there's more room on the evaluation side. Other findings, primary issues that organizations were focused on are habitat and wildlife, followed by water quality. We asked them what they thought was the most effective thing that they were doing. So regardless of what kind of independent corroboration of that, what's your experience of what's been really effective for you? And they said personal contact, followed by conferences, events, and participating in partner organization meetings. And some of these more conventional newsletters, workshops, and tours or field work were also effective, they thought.
What I was saying about a lot of research shows that a lot of people get their news information from the web. One of the things that surprised us was, and this happens in a lot of environmental organizations, most people get their information from television or even reading the newspaper, and that's all shifting right now, but that's not a outreach or education or communications pathways that a lot of environmental organizations use. So we don't necessarily buy print ads or PSAs. So that's the point about that.
And there's I think there's a science to this as well as an art, and there's a lot of expertise. That's, again, one of the reasons we wanted to get folks together. There's a lot of expertise that could be brought to bear, to help us really focus and get more impact from our efforts. And efforts that we have limited resources for, right? I wouldn't say no money or no staff, but it's limited budgets, and you can see 70% of organizations have budgets between $5,000 and $10,000. So it's relatively small budgets, relatively small number of staff, and then also not a lot of volunteers. I think that might be not a lot of volunteers per organization. I think most of us would agree that in this area there is a lot of volunteerism, but it may be, as we talked about, divided among many organizations that are doing work. Yes, sir?
Well, talking about volunteers, I want to give you a little bit of a success story. I belong to Dane County Conservation League. Mm-hmm. We've been cleaning up the Yahara River from the piers in Mendota to Monona, up and down the river. The first year we did this, 2001, no, before then, I guess, we got 22 bags of trash. Mm-hmm. Now, we progressed in those 10 years we've been doing this. This year we did it, we only got 3 bags of trash. One of the things that I noticed is that when we were doing this, people were saying, oh yeah, what are you doing? And we told them, well, we're cleaning up the river. I have to say part of it, I think, is the fact that you have different people living there now. But I see people picking trash up along the river that live there. Mm-hmm. And it never happened before. My feeling is you got to have volunteers exposed to neighborhoods, to people, and I think you get more volunteers. Yep. And I mean, it's just, like I say, it's just one little story, but it's been showing progress. That people are aware of the trash.
And we rely on volunteers at the Arboretum, and I cannot tell you, we rely on the volunteers at the Arboretum, and we're getting more and more and more people coming to help, both picking up trash and doing the restoration.
I think once you get some exposure, that you'll get more volunteers.
Yeah. Going back to that previous slide, yep. The thing that Jane and I were really thrilled that we got 45 different groups to respond to that survey. It was a long survey. It was a really long survey. And so there's a level of commitment that was just extraordinary. What we were amazed by was how few people are doing the work. That there's all this work happening. It's like, is there like 5 people, Marcia being one of them, being one of Ann? I mean, it's like a half a dozen people doing all the work, especially for in terms of education and outreach. That was the thing that was really startling to us, was that the low numbers. And the number of projects that were going on. There was like an array this long of different projects. And what we were really interested in and see a potential for is coordination amongst the groups. Because that was something that came out also in the research findings, was people want to collaborate. Because with, as you said, sir, about we don't have, you know, all of this takes money, and sometimes it's also taking collective partnerships and other ways that we can work together. So, oh, that was a good segue. Okay.
It was a fantastic segue. Yep. One question, did we, I forget whether we looked at the difference between non-responding organizations and responding organizations? Did we look at that at all?
It's embedded in there, but I don't.
It's just a, you know, related to the number of people that are volunteering, that's probably something we could take a little bit more look at, and, you know, what kind of organizations have responded to the survey, and how, you know, how many volunteers do they have in comparison to respondents. Anyway, so that was a great segue, and we have, you can see here, so we've been thinking, there are a lot of resources that we have in the Dane County area, in the Yahara Lakes watershed, a lot of passion that we have, a lot of skills. So how could we, you know, utilize those skills more effectively together, build, you know, like there are organizations that have skills at putting on big events, you know, that I don't have that kind of skill, but I have evaluation skill, maybe that could support looking at activity, you know, I have a different skill set that I could bring to bear. So we wanted to ask you all, you know, what are the kinds of activities we might do more effectively together than we can do separately? And number two, I would say, you know, what kind of resources, you know, if we think, hey, these are a couple of things we could think about pursuing together or across the organizations that you know in the watershed, because, you know, we're a smaller group of people here. But then what kind of resources would we really like to have available across organizations to have us be more effective?
We got hands.
Yep, and I'm going to ask because...
Got any money?
Money, I know. You notice I didn't say money, I said resources.
I know.
But that's it, and James, James Ty in the back has been really, you know, one of the people looking at the resource issue and how can we be more effective at getting resources. But because we didn't introduce, one more thing, because we didn't introduce ourselves in the beginning, I'll just ask you to say your name and maybe what organization that you're with, and forgive me for forgetting that in the beginning, just so we, you know, get to know each other a little bit.
Again, I have, as you can tell, I have a lot of trouble hearing because of my problem. I'm glad to see the way that you spelled it out. I find that you got 45 organizations on here. The one that I represent has put about $700,000 into lakes, and we're not in it.
700,000.
Madison Fishing Expo. We're the umbrella group for all the fishing organizations in this whole state. And so we've stuck that much money. And one of the problems we have is dealing with different agencies that ask for large amounts of money and then don't use them for the things that they say they're going to use them for. They also use them for a lot of things that, for instance, water levels, which is a committee that I'm also on in the Madison Lakes. And we find out that we put areas for spawning of fish in the different parts of the water, and then find out that there's a thing going between the department and the Dane County about the only level that they're worried about spawning fish is Mendota. So in other words, if you spend a few $100,000 putting other spawning areas in, it really doesn't work. So I looked at these organizations, and we probably put a lot more money in than all of them together, but yet we're not included in that group. So I find that to be kind of ironic.
Marcia can speak to that.
Maybe. We did send the survey out to Madison Fishing Expo. Maybe it did not get to the proper person. We did try to solicit from Madison Fishing Expo. They were definitely on our list of folks to get input from. And we would still welcome input if there are some projects or information that you would like to share as far as the survey goes.
Yeah, you gotta be careful who you give your money to, because they don't end up doing exactly what they were supposed to. In fact, they just ignore it and spend it on something else. That's happened more than once.
So, sir, what organization are you with?
Dane County Conservation League.
Okay, I thought so. Okay, I got that. All right. So, Ann, did you have a?
Well, I can't remember what question you asked, but the thing that comes to mind right now, and you tell me whether I answer your question, is in terms of going forward, you know, we're talking about looking at the watershed as a system, as a social system, as an ecological system, as a system that's going to have changes come to it, climate change, economic change. And I think we need to look at our education outreach efforts as a system as well. And so, having, as both of you know, having spent years in this soup of grassroots and government groups addressing this problem, leading to this survey that we've got, I'm feeling that we should use that information, but not overuse it.
Right.
And what I'm feeling, well, here's just a story today. I was feeling like maybe I wasn't accomplishing anything, so I decided to volunteer at Lincoln Elementary School and teaching and reading, because I thought if I can teach one fourth grader to read, I will have accomplished something in my life, you know. And I was going on in there today to meet with my students, and I came in one door, and all along one hallway, all the way along this huge hallway, there were posters that the kids had done about watersheds. And even the Winger watershed, the fish shape was even on a couple of them, and the Yahara watershed was on a couple of them. And it wasn't just pretty pictures, but there was information that showed that the kids, when they take that picture home, you know, poster home at the end of the unit and put it on the dining table with their family, they're going to know a lot about watersheds. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. You know, it was just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And it made me just sort of realize, getting in, I haven't been in the schools for years because my child has grown, that there's just so many places that we can include in these kind of partnering, collaboration you're talking about, that if every fourth grade does that in Madison or in the county, and maybe they do, that we've got kids there who are ambassadors for teaching this stuff. You know, forget us old folks. We've got kids who can lead the way, and how can we use them or the work on water going at the Children's Museum to help lead the way? And if kids are leading, adults will follow.
Yes. So we got Madison Metropolitan School District, the Children's Museum, and then another one I was thinking about was the efforts around the sustainability curriculum, and how can that interweave with the watershed concepts, because those two go hand in hand. So instead of those, you know, one doing one initiative and another one doing another initiative, how do we start weaving that together?
And another weaving point, one of the things I'm hearing you say, Ann, is that focusing on youth, our kids, is something that we could all do together. And we probably do some of, but saying, you know, I know my mission is X, but what I really have is a goal for Clean Lakes. And maybe we could all do something together on youth, even though I wasn't working on youth previously, but just because we say, you know, this is really a way to reach a ton more people, you know, than I could reach with what I'm doing on my own. It's just one, you know, one potential idea for how we could work together.
I brought up about that money issue, and you just hit the key of where that money comes from, and it's the kids, it's the future. They're the ones that can get the money in for this whole thing. They're the ones that can bring all of this together. I've seen it at our show. By the way, my name is Tom Belk. I'm with the Madison Fishing Expo. I've seen the kids at our show. We had Shabazz doing portraits on kids of fish. Shabazz did a wonderful job. We had kids doing t-shirts for kids at the show. We've had 30 to 35,000 people walk through our door in 3 days. Everything that we do at our show goes right back into this community. There's 14 of us to 15 of us that throw this show on. We get nothing. We do it all as voluntary. And it's, Don used to be on it, he knows the trouble you have to go through to do this. But if you're looking for meetings, we'll give you anything you want. You can have a meeting seminar at our show.
That's great.
We can work anything. I've asked the city parks, DNR's there, city parks is there, county parks is there at our show. I've asked them all personally, what can we do to help you at our show? No one has any ideas.
So that may be something to keep dialoguing about and come up with some ideas. I love these ideas about working with the children and youth for fish portraits.
That's the money key.
David.
The gentleman behind you.
Don,
Don, are you, and who are you with?
Oh,
Thank
about
you.
10 different groups.
Okay, all right, Don's in 10 different groups, okay.
Yahara Fishing Club, Friends of Cherokee Marsh, Friends of Pheasant Branch, Wisconsin Wildlife Federation.
Okay.
The living glue right there, right there.
You know, I'd like to talk about target audiences a little bit.
Okay.
And by the way, communications was my vocation for 40 years. You know, Dane County has like 500,000 people. And if you want to try and reach 500,000 people with your message on how to improve the lakes, you've got quite a job in front of you. We've got 5 major hospitals and all the medical clinics that support the hospitals. Think of how many medical people there are in this county. We've got the state government and the county government and the city government. Think of how many people work for government. We've got the university, 30,000 students, professors, teaching assistants. So you start carving the city up into different targets. You've got to learn what this county is made of, what the people do here. We're not a city or a county with a lot of factories. We don't have a lot of manufacturing plants. We don't have, there's lots of things we don't have. So once you identify your target audiences, then you have to start thinking about the channels of communications to reach those audiences. You don't talk to school kids at Cromery School like you're going to talk to university students. You don't talk to businessmen or legislators that live in Madison but work in the state legislature. You don't talk to them the same way you talk to me out in Middleton, Wisconsin. That's a retired old part. You know, you've got to have different channels of communications to carry different messages to your target audiences.
That's absolutely correct, and we put that in the communication
And then the
plan.
third thing you've got to have, communications is a two-way street. And so you have information going out about the lakes and what needs to be done, what the concerns are, what the objectives are, what the vision is, all of these concepts. But then you've got to be able to gather information back in from your target audiences.
What kind of information do you think, you know, coming back in, what kind of information should we be looking for?
Well, that depends upon, what's important is that the channel is open for two-way communication.
Okay.
Because you're going to, you know, if it's just one way, you're not going to succeed. Because you have to do what the people of this county want to do, not what you want to do or what I want to do. We can come up with 10 ideas to improve the lakes, but if the people of this county and this city are not behind it, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I understand.
So you have to, that's why, you know, just in one circle that we were talking about here tonight, say the fishing community, Four Lakes Bassmasters, Muskies Inc., Yahara Fishing Club, Trout Unlimited. There's probably 10 or 12 fishing organizations in this county that you probably don't even know about. Cover maybe 5,000 people. I don't know how many surveys went to that community. And then there's the boating community. We've got 5 lakes. Think of how many sailboats, how many fishing boats, how many pleasure boats, how many, you know, thousands.
And all the businesses associated with all those.
That's right.
Yeah, we did identify those, but your point is well taken about the channels of communication.
Yeah.
Make it fair and make it equal.
So tonight on your presentation, I saw values, I saw concerns, I saw visions, I saw concepts, I saw all of these esoteric principles, but you know, you really didn't talk about communications. The channels of communications, the targets you're trying to reach, and the message that you have to carry to those people. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's great to talk about all these objectives and concepts and visions, and, you know, we've done that ad infinitum
Yeah.
in this community.
Well, actually, the communications plan is about 60 pages that addresses a lot of what you're talking about. So in terms of what are the channels and the message for those particular audiences and things
I
like
wonder
that.
if you'd be willing to look at that, the detailed part of it, see if you had some improvements based on your background, because that would
Yeah.
be really helpful.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
But if you could look at, not just the summary stuff,
Yeah.
but look at the detail, well, that would be great. It would be,
Yeah. Sure.
that would be great.
Gentleman sitting next to Ann and then Barbara.
Oh.
Did you have a comment? you wanted to make?
Yeah, someone back here, I don't know, was you?
Don't blame me.
You were
Ah.
who said we need a good source of money, and
That was me.
yep, there is a good source of money. One of the biggest corporations in town, and they could be induced to contribute a lot of money to a community education program. They are kind of over a barrel right now. I'm talking about Madison Gas and Electric, and their permit is up for renewal to pump their 50 million gallons of water a year into the Odana Hills Recharge Project. They are presently in violation of the water standards because they're pumping salty water into the aquifer. Now that's the water we drink. That fabulous resource is under our feet. One of the biggest companies in town is pumping dirty water into it. Now it's kind of a long shot, but they also have another permit that requires them to pump, after a few years, up to 80 million gallons a year. This is to compensate for the water they take out of Lake Mendota. And they are also in violation of that permit. And probably the only way they can come into compliance with that second one for the volume is if they establish some new ways of getting water into the ground. Now, if we could get them, instead of building big facilities to pump it into the ground, to do community rain gardens, and also if we could induce them to undertake a West Side salt reduction program, then you'd have, I mean, it cost them $2 million to put in that Odana Hills project. So this is the kind of money that could be available if we keep their family to the fire.
And this is the kind of thing we wanted to hear from you all, like what are some other opportunities? And we heard about Madison Fishing Expo and working with the fisheries, and thank you, the groups and such, so thanks. Barbara?
I talked to Brynn Nardi a while ago about, she's the editor of Madison Magazine, and she was interested in doing something on the lakes. And so I think having media sponsorship, because Channel 3 Madison and Channel 3000 are all owned by the same people. So I think that that would be a good project for them to undertake. And then you'd be guaranteed publicity.
One of the things that Marion mentioned was that we did, we could use some more data related to media and messaging, and probably some more skills related to media and messaging. I think we could all use that, and we've got one card, and we've got Brendan Nardi, who also is working with the Clean Lakes Alliance, you know, and has probably expressed that interest through multiple channels. So it occurs to me that maybe that's something we could also work on together and get a more powerful media and messaging work group together that could benefit all of us. You know, like, okay, these are some things that are going to resonate with people. These are some, or if we think about, okay, what specific behaviors do we want to try and, you know, work on together, then how do we develop a communication campaign that is going to, you know, get us over the edge regarding those specific actions.
And education campaign, both of it, it's going to be like,
Yeah.
because one of the best ways of changing behavior is seeing behavior modeled. And so how do we, it's not just talking about it, but it's actually seeing people do it, so.
I guess one of the things, I kind of want to get back to the start of the whole process. I think the things that you brought up tonight are things that some of us that have been around for a while are certainly aware of. I like the way that you really did it.
So maybe, I noticed you have a notebook, Marion, and I wonder, well, so maybe if you, would you be willing to send around your notebook or at least a piece of paper?
We also have the comment sheets.
I do, I got a bunch of them here.
Okay, she's got the, thank you very much. So what we want to do is just get a sense, you know, who wants to continue, you know, figuring out what we can work on together.
So, and we will always provide food.
That's money.
I got one.
Yeah, I got one.
Listen for it. So thank you all very much for an informative and I hope two-way communicative discussion here.